You ever get so tired that trusting a stranger feels easier than trusting your own life? Elijah Carter stared at the flickering train schedule through the misty glass of Platform 9 while rain tapped softly against the station roof like impatient fingers. It was 4:47 in the morning, the kind of cold New York hour that made even coffee taste lonely. His daughter slept beside him, curled against his side on the hard plastic bench, her tiny sneakers barely hanging off the edge. Nia's forehead rested against his jacket sleeve, warm with a low fever that had followed her through most of the week. Elijah brushed the back of his fingers gently against her curls, then checked his phone again. 3 missed calls from dispatch. One final text blinking beneath them. Urgent electrical failure. We need you in Brooklyn now. He closed his eyes for a second. Just 1 second. Long enough to feel the ache in his shoulders settle deeper into his bones. Missing this shift wasn't an option. Last month alone, he'd already called out twice after Nia caught pneumonia. Another absence, and they'd replace him before sunrise. The city always found another tired man willing to work nights. A train screamed somewhere in the distance. Nia stirred, but didn't wake. Elijah glanced toward the restroom hallway again. Closed for cleaning. Of course it was. He exhaled slowly through his nose and scanned the nearly empty station. A man asleep near the vending machine. 2 nurses sharing earbuds by the tracks. And her, the woman with the books. She sat exactly where she always sat. 3rd bench from the pillar beneath the broken arrival monitor. Dark wool coat. Cream scarf. A paperback resting open in her lap beneath the pale station lights. Elijah had noticed her before without meaning to. Not because she was loud or beautiful in the obvious Manhattan way. She wasn't trying to be seen. That was the strange part. Every morning, she blended into silence like she belonged there more than the trains did. Some mornings she read novels. Other mornings, she simply watched the tracks with tired eyes wrapped around a paper coffee cup that probably cost more than his lunch. But she was always there. Always alone. And somehow, over 5 years of early trains and double shifts and rushed mornings raising a daughter by himself, he'd never spoken a single word to her. Until now. Elijah swallowed hard and stood carefully so he wouldn't wake Nia. His knees cracked from exhaustion. The woman looked up before he even reached her bench, almost like she'd been expecting him to move. Her eyes were soft gray. Calm. Too calm. Excuse me, he said quietly, rubbing his hands together against the cold. I hate to ask this. She closed the book slowly but didn't answer. Elijah glanced back at Nia sleeping on the bench behind him, then back to the stranger. Can you watch my daughter for 5 minutes? The woman froze. Not dramatically. Not confused. Just still. Completely still, like the whole station had suddenly stopped breathing around her. Elijah frowned slightly. Miss? Her fingers tightened around the edge of the paperback. Then she looked past him toward Nia sleeping beneath the flickering station lights, and when she spoke, her voice came out barely above a whisper. 5 years, Elijah. He blinked. What? Her eyes lifted back to his. Red around the edges now, shiny with something dangerously close to emotion. I've been waiting 5 years for you to finally trust someone. The train thundered past behind them, shaking the platform beneath his boots, but Elijah Carter barely heard it anymore. Elijah felt the blood drain slowly from his face. The woman said his name the way people say something fragile. Carefully, like it mattered. He stared at her through the dim station light, rainwater trembling along the edge of his jacket collar. How do you know me? He asked quietly. The woman lowered her eyes for a moment, almost guilty for knowing too much. Your train comes at 4:52 every morning, she said softly. Except Tuesdays. Tuesdays you take the later one because your daughter has library club before school. Elijah did not answer. Somewhere down the tracks another train horn echoed through the tunnels, long and lonely. The woman glanced toward Nia again. She likes strawberry oatmeal, but only if it has cinnamon. Elijah's jaw tightened immediately. Okay, he said, under his breath. That is enough. The woman nodded once as if she understood the fear behind his voice. You should be careful, she whispered. I know. His eyes narrowed slightly. For the first time since walking over, exhaustion gave way to instinct. A father's instinct. Protective. Sharp. Who are you? He asked. The woman opened her mouth, then stopped herself. Like there were too many answers, and none of them sounded normal out loud. Before she could speak again, Nia shifted on the bench behind them with a small, sleepy cough. Elijah turned immediately. His whole body softened at once. He walked back toward his daughter, kneeling beside her carefully. "Hey, Bug," he whispered. "You okay?" Nia blinked awake slowly, cheeks flushed pink from the fever. "Daddy, I am here." She looked past him toward the woman near the bench. For one strange second, the little girl smiled. Not nervous, not shy, just familiar somehow. "Book lady," she mumbled sleepily. Elijah looked back at the stranger. The woman smiled faintly for the first time that morning. Small, sad, real. "You know her?" he asked Nia quietly. Nia rubbed one eye with her sleeve. "She gave me crayons one time." Elijah frowned. Last winter when the snow train got stuck. The memory hit him slowly. 12 degrees outside. Delayed subway lines. Nia crying because she was cold and bored after 2 hours underground. He vaguely remembered someone nearby handing over a small pack of crayons and a crossword puzzle booklet. He never even looked up long enough to see who it was. Elijah stood again carefully. "You should have said something." "You looked tired," the woman replied. "Most mornings you do." That landed harder than he expected. Not insulting, not pitying, just true. He glanced at the dispatch text again. Another message appeared. Last call before reassignment. His chest tightened. Bills. Rent. School medicine. Con Edison notices stacked on the kitchen counter beside unfinished homework pages. Life did not pause because a stranger knew his daughter liked cinnamon oatmeal. "I have to go," he muttered mostly to himself. Nia coughed softly again behind him. The woman reached into her coat pocket and held out a small packet without stepping closer. Children's fever reducers. Sealed. Unopened. "She started coughing yesterday morning," the woman said. "I figured you probably forgot to buy more." Elijah stared at the packet in disbelief. "You have been watching us?" "No," she said immediately. "I have been noticing you." Silence stretched between them while rain tapped softly against the station windows. The city beyond the platform still looked half asleep, washed blue beneath the coming sunrise. Elijah looked at Nia, then back at the woman. Every lesson the world had taught him told him not to trust strangers, especially kind ones. But Nia was already leaning sideways against the bench watching the woman with sleepy little eyes that were no longer afraid. And somehow that scared him more than anything else. Elijah looked at the medicine packet in her hand, but did not take it right away. The station lights buzzed faintly overhead, throwing pale reflections across the wet floor tiles while commuters drifted past without noticing the strange stillness settling between them. "You should not know this much about us," he said quietly. The woman nodded like she had rehearsed hearing that sentence for years. "You are right." Her voice stayed calm, but her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the packet. "And if I were you, I would probably walk away too." Elijah glanced at Nia again. His daughter had curled sideways on the bench, blanket slipping halfway onto the floor. Before he could reach down to fix it, the woman moved first. Slow, careful. She picked the blanket up gently and tucked it back around Nia's legs without touching anything else. The little girl sighed softly in her sleep. Safe, comfortable. Elijah watched every movement. "You got kids?" he asked suddenly. The question seemed to hit somewhere deep inside her. For a second, she looked away toward the dark train tunnel beyond the platform. "No," she answered quietly. "Not anymore." Something in the way she said it stopped him from asking another question. A cold gust of air rolled through the station as another downtown train approached. The woman stepped back from the bench, giving him space. "Again, you should take the job," she said. "I can stay with her until your sister gets here." Elijah blinked. "My sister, Angela," the woman replied softly. "She usually picks Nia up when you get emergency calls." His stomach tightened immediately. "Okay," he said under his breath. "That is enough." The woman lowered her eyes again. "I know." He rubbed a tired hand across his face. Everything about this felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly. Just impossible. Nobody noticed another person this closely anymore. Not in New York. Not without wanting something. But she did not seem unstable. She did not seem manipulative either. Just sad. Deeply sad in a way that looked old. "Why?" Elijah finally asked. "Why us?" The woman stared down at the paperback, still resting in her lap. Her thumb brushed slowly across the worn cover before she answered. 5 years ago, she said softly, there was a storm in October. The train stopped running for almost 3 hours. Elijah's expression changed slightly. He remembered that storm. Everyone in the city remembered it. Flooded tunnels. Delays. Sirens echoing all night downtown. "You were sitting 2 cars down from me," she continued. Your daughter could not have been older than 6 months. Elijah went still. She would not stop crying. The woman smiled faintly at the memory, though sadness lingered behind it. You looked terrified. Rain rattled harder now against the station windows as commuters hurried past them carrying umbrellas and coffee cups and tired Monday faces. But Elijah barely noticed any of it anymore. You kept apologizing to her, the woman whispered. I am trying, baby. I am trying. Over and over again. His chest tightened sharply. He remembered that night too well. Nia burning with fever in his arms. No formula left at home. His wife gone barely 3 weeks. He had been 20 pounds thinner back then. Hollow-eyed. Barely sleeping. Barely surviving. You were crying too, the woman said quietly. But every time she looked up at you, you smiled anyway. Elijah stared at her without speaking. That was the first time I saw you, she admitted. And I think, her voice faltered slightly before steadying again. I think it was the first honest thing I had seen in a very long time. Somewhere above them, the station speaker crackled with another delayed arrival announcement. Nia shifted sleepily beneath the blanket again and reached one tiny hand outward without opening her eyes. The woman instinctively stepped closer. Elijah expected his daughter to pull away from the stranger. Instead, Nia's little fingers wrapped gently around the sleeve of the woman's coat, like she already knew where comfort lived. Elijah should have left. Every practical instinct in his body told him to grab Nia, call dispatch with another excuse, and disappear into the city before sunrise swallowed this strange conversation whole. But he stayed. Maybe because the woman standing in front of him did not look proud of knowing his pain. She looked haunted by it. Nia's tiny hand still held onto the sleeve of her coat. The woman glanced down at the little fingers carefully wrapped around the fabric, like something fragile had chosen her by accident. She trusts people faster than I do, Elijah said quietly. That is usually how children survive, the woman replied. The answer lingered between them longer than expected. Elijah finally took the medicine packet from her hand. The seal was untouched exactly like she said. Cherry-flavored. The same brand he always bought when Nia got sick. You still have not told me your name, he murmured. For a second, she almost smiled. Claire, she said softly. Claire Whitmore. The name felt familiar, though he could not place why. Maybe from an ad. Maybe from one of those bookstore signs around Manhattan people walked past without noticing. Elijah nodded once. Elijah, I know. He exhaled through his nose tiredly. Right. Claire looked embarrassed for the first time since they started talking. I realize how this sounds. You realize it sounds insane? He asked gently. Yes. A small laugh escaped him before he could stop it. Not amused exactly. Just exhausted enough for reality to stop making sense. Nearby, the station coffee vendor rolled open his cart, and the smell of burnt espresso drifted through the cold morning air. Claire reached into her coat pocket again. Elijah stiffened slightly until she pulled out a folded napkin instead. Inside sat 2 small blueberry muffins wrapped neatly in wax paper. She usually gets hungry around 5:15, Claire said quietly, holding them toward him, especially when she has a fever. Elijah stared at the muffins in disbelief. You carry snacks for my daughter? Claire's eyes dropped immediately. Not just for her. He waited. For whoever might need one. But even she did not sound convinced by her own answer. Elijah rubbed his jaw slowly while watching the rain smear silver lines down the station windows. 5 years. 5 entire years this woman had existed quietly on the edges of his life without him truly seeing her once. And somehow that realization hurt more than it should have. You said that night changed something for you, he said finally. Claire grew still again. It did. Her voice softened almost into the sound of the rain itself. Before that train ride, I had stopped looking at people. Elijah frowned slightly. Claire folded her hands together against the paperback in her lap. My fiancé and I lost a baby 3 months before I saw you. The words came carefully, not dramatic, just worn thin from carrying them too long. After that, everything felt cold. She glanced toward the tracks where the first streaks of sunrise barely touched the tunnel walls. People kept telling me healing takes time. Therapy, travel, work, but none of it changed anything. Her fingers tightened slightly together. Then I saw you holding your daughter like the world had already broken you, and you still chose kindness anyway. Elijah looked away first. The station suddenly felt too quiet around him. He remembered those months after his wife passed. The endless exhaustion. The panic attacks in grocery store aisles. learning how to braid tiny curls from YouTube videos at 2 in the morning because Nia cried when he got them wrong. Nobody called men like him graceful. They called them surviving. I was not kind, he muttered. I was just trying not to fail her. Claire looked at him carefully then. Really carefully. Those are not always different things. The announcement speaker crackled. Overhead again. Final call for maintenance response team. Elijah checked the time sharply. 4 minutes left before he lost the shift. He cursed softly under his breath. Claire stood immediately. Go, she said. I will stay. Elijah hesitated. Every instinct still warned him not to trust this situation. But then Nia opened her sleepy eyes halfway, looked up at Claire, and whispered one tiny sentence into the cold station air. Daddy, she smells like books. Claire blinked hard and looked away toward the tracks before Elijah could see her eyes fill. Elijah looked at his daughter one last time before making the decision every parent fears making. Trusting someone he did not fully know because life was not giving him another option. Nia sat bundled beneath the blanket with flushed cheeks and sleepy eyes, while Claire knelt beside her holding the unopened muffin carefully in both hands like she was afraid even kindness could scare the child away if done too loudly. My sister will be here in 20 minutes, Elijah said firmly. I will text you her picture. Claire nodded immediately. Okay. Nia takes medicine with apple juice only. Not orange. I know. Elijah paused. Right. He crouched in front of his daughter and brushed a curl gently behind her ear. Bug. Daddy has to fix the lights downtown. Nia blinked slowly. With the wires? Yeah. Okay. No fear. No tears. Children always knew more about people than adults did. That thought unsettled him all over again. You stay with Miss Claire until Angie comes. Nia looked toward Claire, studying her quietly the way children studied storms through windows. Then she nodded once. Can she read the dragon book? Claire's face softened instantly. Only if you promise to help with the voices. Nia smiled for the first time that morning. Small. Feverish. Real. Elijah stood slowly, still uncertain whether he was making the smartest decision of his life or the dumbest one. Claire must have seen the hesitation in his face because she spoke before he could pull away. You can call every 5 minutes if you want. I probably will. Good. Another train roared through the station, wind pushing cold air across the platform hard enough to shake loose papers near the tracks. Elijah checked the time again and muttered something under his breath. Late. Already late. Claire reached into her bag and handed him a folded business card. In case your phone dies. Elijah glanced down at it while adjusting his jacket sleeve. Whitmore and Vale Literary Foundation. Founder and Executive Director. He looked up sharply. You own the bookstores? Claire looked almost uncomfortable about it. Some of them. Suddenly the name clicked into place. The elegant little Manhattan bookstores with warm lamps in the windows and free reading hours for kids every Saturday morning. Nia loved those stores. He swallowed slowly. You are that Claire Whitmore? She gave a tiny nod. That sounds worse out loud than I hoped. Elijah almost laughed again despite himself. You have been sitting on train platforms at 5 in the morning for 5 years, and nobody in the city knows. People rarely notice quiet women reading books. There was no arrogance in the sentence. Just truth. Dispatch called again. Elijah finally answered. Carter. The supervisor barked immediately. Tell me you are on your way. Elijah looked at Nia. Then Claire. I am coming now. He hung up and shoved the phone back into his pocket. His stomach still felt tight, leaving his daughter with a stranger no matter how gentle she seemed. Claire must have sensed it because she stepped back slightly, creating space instead of demanding trust from him. You do not owe me confidence, she said softly. Just go keep your job. Those words hit differently. No performance. No manipulation. Just understanding. Elijah nodded once and started backing toward the stairs leading down to the maintenance line. Halfway there, he turned again. Claire. Yes. Why did you never say hello before today? The question lingered between them while the city slowly woke beyond the rain-covered station windows. Claire looked down at Nia resting against her side before answering. Because broken people usually do not need strangers talking to them before sunrise. Elijah stared at her for one long second. Then he nodded quietly and disappeared down the station stairs. Into the cold humming belly of New York while above him his daughter leaned sleepily against a woman who smelled like old books and rainwater and somehow already felt familiar. The city beneath Manhattan sounded different before sunrise. Louder somehow. Harsher. Elijah moved through the underground maintenance tunnels with a tool bag slung over one shoulder, while fluorescent lights flickered above his head in uneven pulses. Water dripped somewhere deep inside the concrete walls. Steam hissed from old pipes overhead. His phone stayed clenched tightly in his palm the entire walk downtown. At 5:11 exactly, he checked it again. No missed calls. No emergency texts. Nothing. That should have comforted him. Instead, it made him more anxious. Across the city above him, Claire sat beside Nia on the station bench, while the little girl slowly picked pieces off the blueberry muffin with sleepy concentration. Why do grown-ups always drink coffee if it tastes sad? Nia asked quietly. Claire blinked once before laughing under her breath. That might be the smartest question anybody has ever asked me. Nia nodded seriously. Daddy says coffee tastes like bills. Claire looked down for a second, smiling despite herself. Your father sounds wise. He says that means tired. The station had started filling now with commuters carrying umbrellas and briefcases, and exhausted faces washed pale beneath the overhead lights. Yet somehow the bench beside Claire still felt strangely separate from the rest of the world, like a small island of stillness in the middle of New York noise. Nia leaned lightly against Claire's shoulder while holding the dragon book open in her lap. You skipped page 12? The little girl whispered accusingly. Claire gasped softly. Did I? That is where the dragon steals pancakes. Well, that sounds important. Nia nodded. Very. Claire turned back carefully and began reading again, her voice low and warm beneath the distant train announcements. It had been years since she had read aloud to anyone. She forgot how different stories sounded when another person trusted you enough to listen. Her throat tightened unexpectedly halfway through the chapter. Nia noticed immediately. Are you sick too? Claire shook her head gently. No, sweetheart. Then why do your eyes look rainy? Children. Claire had spent years surrounded by investors and board members and polished adults who lied professionally with perfect smiles. Yet one feverish 7-year-old could still look straight through her. Sometimes grown-ups carry old sadness around, Claire admitted quietly. Nia thought about that carefully while swinging her feet above the station floor. Daddy says sadness gets lighter if somebody sits next to you. Claire looked away quickly toward the tracks before emotion could fully reach her face. Somewhere deep in the tunnel, another train rumbled closer. She remembered sitting alone in this exact station years earlier after the hospital told her there would never be another pregnancy. She remembered the numbness afterward, the silence, the awful feeling that the entire city kept moving while her own life had stopped breathing. Then one stormy night, she had looked up and seen Elijah Carter holding a crying infant against his chest, whispering apologies to a baby too young to understand words. And somehow that exhausted stranger comforting his daughter while his own grief bled through his eyes had cracked something open inside her. Miss Claire? Nia asked softly. Claire blinked back to the present. Did you know my mommy? The question arrived so gently, it almost hurt more. Claire shook her head slowly. No, sweetheart. Nia looked down at the dragon book in her lap. Daddy still talks to her sometimes. Claire swallowed carefully. Yeah. Mostly when he thinks I am asleep. The station lights buzzed overhead, while rain continued sliding softly down the windows facing the tracks. Claire suddenly understood something that made her chest ache. Elijah had not survived because life became easier after loss. He survived because his daughter kept needing breakfast and bedtime stories and medicine and tiny shoes tied before school. Love had dragged him forward one ordinary, exhausted morning at a time. Claire stared quietly at the little girl leaning against her shoulder and realized she had spent 5 years admiring a man who never once knew somebody was watching him choose kindness instead of bitterness every single day. By 6:03 that morning, Elijah had already climbed through 2 flooded maintenance tunnels, replaced 1 burned transformer relay, and nearly slipped twice on wet steel grating beneath Lexington Avenue. The city above him would never know how many tired men kept New York breathing before sunrise. People only noticed trains when they stopped moving. His supervisor barked instructions from somewhere behind him while sparks snapped faintly inside an open control panel. Carter, I need the lower circuit live in 10 minutes. Elijah nodded without looking up. His hands moved automatically across the wiring, steady from years of repetition, but his thoughts stayed 30 blocks north inside a rain-soaked station beside a woman who somehow knew the shape of his grief. He checked his phone again. Still nothing. No texts from Claire. No missed calls from Angela. Just silence. Oddly, that silence calmed him more than constant updates would have. It felt respectful somehow. Above ground, Claire and Nia had moved from the platform bench into the small bookstore cafe attached to the station lobby to escape the cold rain drifting through the tracks. The cafe smelled like cinnamon rolls and wet coats, and old paperbacks warmed beneath soft amber lamps. Nia sat wrapped in Claire's oversized scarf at a tiny corner table coloring dragons on the back of a napkin, while Claire stirred honey slowly into a cup of tea. "Daddy says bookstores are churches for tired people," Nia announced proudly without looking up. Claire smiled softly into her tea. "Your father says a lot of beautiful things for somebody who looks permanently exhausted. That is because he falls asleep during movies." "Honestly, same." Nia giggled quietly. The sound caught Claire off guard. Children's laughter had once belonged to another version of her life. One she stopped visiting because the memories hurt too much afterward. A waitress approached carrying another small cup of apple juice and paused suddenly when she recognized Claire. "Miss Whitmore." Claire looked up gently. "Morning, Diane." The waitress blinked in. "Surprise. You remember my name? You helped me pick books for a children's donation drive 3 Christmases ago." Diane's expression softened immediately. "Right." She glanced toward Nia coloring dragons beside the window. "Your daughter." Claire opened her mouth to answer, but Nia beat her to it. "Nope, but she smells safe." Diane smiled without understanding the weight of those words and walked away toward another table. Claire stared quietly down into her tea after that. Safe. Nobody had called her that before. Not in years. Most people called her successful, elegant, brilliant, untouchable. Safe belonged to softer people. Kinder people. Meanwhile, underground, Elijah finally restored power to the lower circuit. The tunnel lights hummed back alive one section at a time, pale gold against the damp concrete walls. His co-workers cheered half-heartedly before moving toward the next repair. Elijah leaned against the panel, breathing hard, while sweat cooled beneath his jacket collar. His phone buzzed suddenly in his pocket. His chest tightened instantly. One new message. Unknown number. He opened it immediately. "She took her medicine. Fever is lower. She also informed me dragons apparently hate oatmeal." Elijah stared at the message for a long second before another one arrived beneath it. "Also, your daughter believes you can fix literally anything in New York City. No pressure." Against all logic, Elijah smiled. Small, tired, real. The first genuine smile he had felt in months appeared underground beside rusted train lines and leaking pipes, because a stranger sent him updates about dragons and oatmeal at 6 in the morning. One of the older maintenance workers noticed immediately. "Damn, Carter." The man laughed while tightening bolts nearby. "You finally got a life outside those tunnels?" Elijah slid the phone quietly back into his pocket. "No," he answered after a pause. "I think maybe life just finally looked back at me for a second." At 7:14 that morning, the rain finally stopped. Pale sunlight pushed weakly through the bookstore cafe windows, washing the wooden tables in soft gold while the city outside dragged itself into another workday. Nia had fallen asleep, sideways across the booth with one crayon still clutched in her tiny hand. A half-colored dragon stretched across 3 paper napkins beside her untouched apple juice. Claire sat quietly across from the sleeping child, watching steam curl upward from a cup of tea gone cold 20 minutes ago. She should have left by now. Board meetings waited downtown. 3 missed calls from her assistant blinked silently across her phone screen beside a calendar full of investors, interviews, and decisions worth millions. But somehow none of it felt urgent compared to the little girl sleeping beneath her scarf. Claire carefully reached forward and brushed a loose curl away from Nia's forehead. "Fever lower. Breathing calmer. Better." The child stirred slightly, but did not wake. "She trusts you fast." Claire looked up immediately. Angela stood beside the cafe entrance, still wearing hospital scrubs beneath a long winter coat, exhaustion hanging beneath her eyes in soft purple shadows. Elijah's sister looked almost exactly like him around the mouth. Same guarded kindness. Same tired posture people carried after surviving too much for too long. Claire stood slowly. "Angela, that obvious?" Claire nodded once toward the sleeping child. "She has your brother's eyes." Angela smiled faintly at that before sliding into the booth beside Nia. The little girl woke instantly at the familiar presence. "Auntie Angie." "Hey, Bug." Angela kissed the top of her head gently before glancing toward Claire with careful curiosity. My brother does not leave Nia with people. I gathered that. Angela studied her quietly for a moment. But he left her with you. The sentence carried more weight than accusation. Claire looked down at the dragon drawings scattered across the table. I think he was out of options. Angela shook her head softly. No. Elijah always finds another option. Silence settled briefly between the women while morning commuters moved outside the cafe windows in blurry waves of umbrellas and coffee cups. Finally, Angela looked toward Claire again. So who are you? Claire almost answered with titles first. Founder, executive director, public figure. But none of those felt true sitting here beside a sleepy child and cold tea. Someone your brother accidentally helped a long time ago, she said quietly instead. Angela stared at her carefully, then nodded once like she understood more than Claire expected. That sounds like Elijah. Nia suddenly tugged lightly at Claire's sleeve. Are you leaving? The question landed softly but hard enough to ache. Claire hesitated. I probably should. Nia looked genuinely disappointed. Oh, Claire smiled sadly. I have work. Daddy works too much. Angela snorted quietly into her coffee. That part is definitely genetic. Nia reached into the pocket of her tiny coat and pulled out the folded dragon napkin covered in crooked crayon drawings. You can keep this so you do not get lonely. Claire froze. Completely froze. Nobody had offered her comfort in years. Respect, yes. Admiration. Attention. But not comfort. Not with sticky little fingers and crooked dragons and complete sincerity. Claire accepted the napkin carefully like it might break apart in her hands. Thank you, she whispered. Nia leaned sleepily against Angela again. Daddy says lonely people need extra kindness because they forget where they put theirs. Claire looked away immediately toward the rain-streaked windows before emotion could fully reach her face. At that exact moment her phone buzzed once across the table. One new message from Elijah. Did she eat breakfast? Claire stared at the screen for a long second before typing back slowly beneath the soft hum of the bookstore lights. Yes. And somehow she made this place feel less empty too. Elijah did not leave the tunnel system until almost noon. By then his shoulders burned from lifting equipment and his hands smelled like metal and machine oil no matter how many times he washed them in the maintenance sink. The city above ground had fully awakened while he spent the morning buried beneath it fixing problems strangers would never notice. Rainwater still dripped from the edges of buildings when he finally climbed the station stairs back into daylight, carrying his tool bag low beside his leg. He looked exhausted enough to disappear into the crowd. But the moment he stepped into the bookstore cafe and saw Nia asleep against Angela's shoulder beside a half-finished dragon drawing, something inside him slowed down. Claire sat near the window beneath the warm amber lights, reading quietly with one finger tucked between the pages. She looked up almost immediately when he entered. Not startled, just aware, like she always was. Elijah crossed the cafe slowly. Nia woke the second she heard his boots against the wooden floor. Daddy, he smiled before he could stop himself. Hey, bug. She climbed into his arms carefully, still warm from sleep and apple juice and bookstore heat. Elijah pressed his lips gently against her forehead. Fever gone. Thank God. You smell like wires, Nia mumbled against his shoulder. Occupational hazard. Angela stood and stretched tiredly. She was good all morning. Elijah nodded gratefully toward his sister before finally looking at Claire directly. Thank you. Claire closed her book softly. She mostly entertained herself. Still, their eyes held for a second longer than strangers usually allowed. Not romantic. Not dramatic. Just quiet recognition between two tired people who accidentally stepped into each other's loneliness. Angela gathered her bag and kissed Nia's cheek. I have to get back to the hospital before somebody realizes I escaped. Nia groaned dramatically. Adult jobs ruin everything. Correct, Angela laughed. After she left, silence settled gently over the table again. Outside the cafe windows, sunlight finally broke through the clouds in pale streaks across the wet sidewalks. Elijah adjusted Nia higher against his shoulder before noticing the dragon napkin folded carefully beside Claire's teacup. She gave you artwork, he said. Claire touched the corner of the napkin lightly with her fingertips. Apparently, it is anti-loneliness protection. Elijah smiled quietly at that. Then his expression softened into something more thoughtful. She only gives drawings away to people she plans on seeing again. Claire looked up slowly. That sounds like pressure. It kind of is. Nia suddenly leaned backward in Elijah's arms and pointed toward Claire's book. You stopped before the dragon found his family. Claire blinked. I did not think you would remember. I remember book things. Elijah chuckled softly beneath his breath. That part definitely comes from her mother. The sentence changed the air slightly. Softer now. More open. Claire hesitated before speaking carefully. What was she like? Elijah looked down at Nia for a moment first. Kind, he answered quietly. Even when life was not. Claire nodded slowly like she understood the importance of that answer. Elijah shifted the tool bag on his shoulder and glanced toward the station clock. The city already wanted more from him. More hours. More work. More surviving. But for the first time in years, rushing away felt strangely difficult. Nia rested sleepily against his chest while sunlight warmed the cafe windows beside them. Claire looked down at her teacup before asking softly, Did you fix the city? Elijah huffed a tired laugh. For about 10 minutes. That still counts. Another small silence passed between them. Comfortable this time. The kind that did not demand filling. Finally, Elijah reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small worn key attached to a faded subway token keychain. Claire frowned slightly. What is that? The spare key to my apartment. Claire stared at him immediately. Elijah. Before today, he said quietly. There were exactly 2 people in New York I trusted with this. Her expression softened with surprise. Why me? Elijah looked at her for a long moment while Nia slept peacefully against his shoulder beneath the warm bookstore lights. Then he answered in the gentlest voice Claire Whitmore had heard in years. Because my daughter knew you were safe before